Hey guys, Sneaky Snake here, Brothers in Arms, World of Warships, and today's video is a very exciting video indeed. We're going to be taking a look at the brand new proposed U.S. Cruiser Heavy and Light Cruiser Tech Tree Split, which is currently a work in progress, and this information was leaked on the RU portal, I believe, of the World of Warships forums, and has since made its way to Reddit. So what this video is going to do, I'm going to talk briefly about each ship that's getting changed. I'm also going to talk about the new ships that are incoming, and then I'm going to also talk about how I think that they should be balanced, how I think that they will be implemented into the game, and overall the kind of playstyle that you could probably expect with these ships. So I am very, very excited. Of course, being an American, I've always enjoyed the American cruisers in game. I do have the Des Moines myself, as does Puddin and Spider. So we're all looking forward to this because American cruisers are so darn fun to play. And with that being said, let's jump right in. Also, in the background, we're going to have some Des Moines gameplay going on from Elastic Spider. Alrighty guys, here is the picture that came across on the forums and then made its way to Reddit. You can see that the split happens at Tier 6, and we are getting a total of 5 new ships and 1 change to the USS Cleveland. So it starts out with Tiers 2 through 5 being the same, the Chester, the St. Louis, the Phoenix, and the Omaha respectively. However, once you reach Tier 6, it splits off into the heavy and the light line, as I alluded to earlier. The Pensacola, the New Orleans, and the Baltimore are all getting dropped down 1 tier to make way for the new Tier 9 American heavy cruiser, the USS Buffalo, and then at Tier 10, the Des Moines will stay the same. For the light cruiser side, there is quite a bit of changes. The USS Dallas and Helena represent Tiers 6 and 7. The Cleveland is moving back to its supposed rightful place at Tier 8, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And then at Tier 9, you have the Seattle, and at Tier 10, the USS Worcester. So, some really awesome ships coming up here. I'll be providing also for you guys some screenshots of these ships as well if you don't know what they look like, and I'll be going through each one. So, with that being said, let's start with the heavy cruiser line. Alrighty guys, so the very first ship here at Tier 6 is going to be the Pensacola. Now of course right now the Pensacola is the Tier 7 American heavy cruiser, and taking a look at the statistics of the ship here, I'm on the wiki page right now. Hit point total 34,300 is pretty nice. You got a 15-second reload with 10 203mm main guns, and of course we all know the Pensacola's biggest weakness is her very poor armor scheme, at least in terms of its thickness. This is not a very strong ship in terms of its armor layout, and it takes damage very, very hard. It also has a top speed of about 32.5 knots, and its detectability range from the surface, unmodified, is 12.78 kilometers. So to fit at Tier 6, what I think is going to happen is one of 2 things. Either one, they're going to slightly reduce the rate of fire of the Pensacola, because let's be honest, 10 203s at Tier 6 is some absolutely brutal firepower. When you compare it to ships like the Perth, or the Leander, or even Alba, with 8 and 6 guns respectively, the former 2 having only 152s and the Alba having 203 millimeters, this is going to be some ridiculous firepower at Tier 6. You're going to be able to dev strike cruisers pretty easily in this thing, to be honest with you, because the majority of the cruisers at Tier 6 have hit point totals, you know, around anywhere from 25 to 32, 33,000-ish. So you're going to have some ridiculous salvos on those ships. And yeah, the Pensacola, there was a bit of bitching on the forums about it and on Reddit about it, saying that this is going to be way too powerful at the tier. So we'll see what they decide to do. Something else that they could potentially do is lower the hit points on it to make it, you know, fit in line a little bit better. However, Wargaming usually bases their top hit point totals off of the displacement of the ship. So I don't know if the hit point is going to get changed with, but of course they could do some minor things like reducing the turret rotation speed. You could make the gun accuracy worse, maybe reduce the reload by a second or 2. That, you know, those are all things. And then of course the Pensacola's AA isn't known for being ridiculous. I mean, it's okay for Tier 7, but at Tier 6 the AA isn't going to be anything, you know, too abhorrent. It's not going to be like the Cleveland is at Tier 6 right now. So overall I think the Pensacola will be okay at Tier 6, at least in that sense, but yeah, the guns on this thing are going to be ridiculous. The second ship now in the heavy cruiser line from Tier 6 and up is the New Orleans, which will now fall from Tier 8 to Tier 7. So the questions that need to be asked about this ship, well, the only really big one is if it's going to keep its radar, to be honest with you. Of course, there's 3 cruisers for the Americans at Tier 7 that have access to it. You have the Reward ship, the Flint, the Premium Atlanta and the Premium Indianapolis. And the Indianapolis's radar is actually pretty good. It extends out to about 10 kilometers, so that's really, really nice. And it'll be interesting to see if they decide to let the Tech Tree ship retain its radar. Of course, radar is something that is, or at least it was when it was released, exclusively to Tier 8 and above American and Soviet cruisers, so we'll see if they decide to keep that. Now, the reason why I'm really cool with the New Orleans coming down a tier is because of, well, history. Now, I'm not going to be confused with any ridiculous history nerd on ships, but I do know that the Washington Naval Treaty in the 30s and the London Naval Treaty, one of the two, stipulated that cruisers should not be over 10,000 tons. Now, with that in mind, you need to take a look at some of the other Tier 8 cruisers that are currently in the game. Ships like the Mogami and the Charles Martel, both real and paper designs, were ships that did not conform to the Washington Naval Treaty. Even the Admiral Hipper and the Prinz Eugen did not as well, and those are viewed as some mediocre Tier 8 cruisers. So I've always felt like the New Orleans has kind of been outgunned in that regard. You know, the Charles Martel's got a 10-second reload. The Mogami can get some absolutely ridiculous DPM with its 155mm guns. You have ships like the Chapayev and the Mikhail Kutuzov that have really good range and really good potential DPM with IFHE. So moving it down to Tier 7 makes sense to me because the New Orleans was one of the American cruisers that was still trying to conform to the Washington Naval Treaty or the London Naval Treaty, whichever one it was. So having it compare now more favorably with ships like the York, ships like the Algerie, it makes a lot more sense to me. And it also makes more sense when I talk more about the Baltimore, which will come right after it. For the Tier 8 American heavy cruiser, it is now going to be the USS Baltimore, which currently in game is, of course, the Tier 9. Now, again, this is a move that I really, really like based off of two reasons. One, we can go reference the treaty again. Even on the wiki page, it says, quote, designed after the treaty limitations have been lifted, end quote. This is really important to know because this was the first American heavy cruiser that they decided, hey, the other powers, the Axis powers, they're being douchebags and they're not, conforming to this treaty. So let's actually make a cruiser that's going to be able to favorably match up to it. So that's why I like it. And again, when you compare it to ships like the Mogami and the Admiral Hipper, these are real-life ships that the Baltimore was intended to counter. So it sitting now at Tier 8 makes a lot of sense to me. And a lot of the cruisers at Tier 8 were ships that were built just after the Washington Naval Treaty was thrown away, and they're like, hey, screw it, we don't need to worry about that 10,000-ton limit. Now, of course, the big question for the Baltimore is not necessarily with the radar. We know it's going to have radar because it'll be at Tier 8, but we'll have to ask whether it will keep its heel. All Tier 9 cruisers and above have access to heels, so it'll be very interesting to see if it decides to get it. Now, of course, Tier 8 cruisers and heels is a very, very touchy subject amongst the World of Warships community. I myself made a big forum post about it a couple months, and honestly, it was a complete shit show because there's a lot of people out there that think Tier 8 cruisers do need heels. Now, of course, ships like the Otago and the Edinburgh, Japanese and British in design, do have access to heels, and if the American Baltimore takes its heel down to Tier 8, that will be very interesting as well. Now, one thing to note, at Tier 8, it will probably have to have some sort of hit point reduction. 42,700 is a very, very hefty amount. Again, as I mentioned earlier with the Pensacola, there's no guarantee that Wargaming is going to do that simply because ships are based off their displacement for their hit point total. At least there's some formula out there for it. But the question that must be asked for the Baltimore, the other one, is that its rate of fire. Currently at Tier 9, it can get down to the gold standard for 203mm, which is an 8.8 second reload, which is the 10-second regular reload with main battery modification 3 added onto it. So we'll see if the Baltimore goes back to a 10-second reload, and that's the best that you can get it at. We'll see if how that works for the balance, but if it has about a 10-second reload, I'm cool with that because it matches up with the Charles Martel, which is another Tier 8 cruiser that has a 10-second reload. That'll be plenty okay in my book. And now for the new American Tier 9 heavy cruiser, here is this nice little photo taken from the Reddit page. This is the USS Buffalo. Now, something to note about it. One, it looks just like a Baltimore, in all honesty. And the reason why is because I did some research. This was one of the preliminary designs for a cruiser that preceded the actual development and construction of the Baltimore-class heavy cruisers. Now, something very interesting to note about this ship, there's two big differences between this and the Baltimore. One, you can see that there are 4 turrets with 3 guns apiece. Yes, you heard me correctly. 12 203mm guns. Now, having the 8.8 second rate of fire that the Baltimore has at Tier 9 seems a bit overkill on something like this because you get a whole extra turret, and this thing will absolutely destroy cruisers at medium to close ranges. 12 of those guns with the American AP shells that have great penetration, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with. So that's something that's different from the Baltimore. But also, and I'm going to zoom in here on the picture, yes, you see it correctly. There are torpedo tubes on the side. Now, I don't know exactly how many torpedoes are on each side of the ship. I wasn't able to find that information when I was digging around, but this ship has been in the game files since the closed beta, if I'm not mistaken. So they have tried, or are trying to put it in there, and it appears that it's going to be in the actual regular tech tree. So they need to be very careful about balancing this ship, because of course it'll get Baltimore levels of AA, I'm sure. Obviously, it'll have access to a heel, it'll have access to great defensive AA, it'll have access to radar because that's the American thing. So we'll definitely see how they're going to balance this thing, because if you're going to have Hindenburg levels of a rate of fire with Hindenburg levels of the number of guns, again 8.8 seconds and 12 203s respectively at Tier 9, that might be a bit overkill. The Rune and the Saint Louis, the German and the French design, both have the potential for an 8.8 second reload at Tier 9, but of course those ships only have access to 9 guns. So we'll see how they decide to do the rate of fire. However, it might be a bit of a different transition now to the Tier 10 Des Moines, which, as far as I'm aware, there's no changes to it, because if they decide to nerf the Buffalo's rate of fire, and then all of a sudden they give people the Des Moines with a much better rate of fire and no torpedoes, there might be a bit of a difficulty in the transition from the ship. But what we're looking at here is a cruiser that's just going to absolutely blow shit up at point blank range. This thing is, oh boy, I think it's going to be a fan favorite in my opinion. I think this ship is going to be incredibly powerful, unless Wargaming really nerfs its rate of fire or something like that, but we'll see how it works. I'm excited for this ship, no doubt. Alrighty guys, now we're going to switch over to the light cruiser side of things. And at Tier 6, the first one for the Americans is the USS Dallas. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't have anything on it. I have absolutely no idea what this ship is supposed to be. There is a very nice website, shipscribe.com, that has a whole bunch of different blueprints from the United States Naval Department, the Bureau of Construction and Repair / the Bureau of Ships, that has a whole bunch of different design studies that were made for American cruisers during the interwar and the early part of World War II, and I'll be honest with you, I can't find anything on this ship. The USS Dallas in particular, it is an actual ship that exists in real life. It is a nuclear Los Angeles class attack submarine, and it was also supposed to be one of the Des Moines class heavy cruisers that was ultimately canceled. I believe only 3 of those things were made, or maybe 2. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, the USS Dallas as a Tier 6 light cruiser does not exist, at least nothing that I've found. So if you guys have anything on it, please let me know. Please put it in the description below, or excuse me, in the comments below, and we can certainly chat more about it. For Tier 7, we have a very good-looking cruiser. This is the USS Helena, one of the 2 St. Louis-class light cruisers built for the United States Navy in the mid-1930s. Now, taking a look at this thing, what it honestly looks like is a Cleveland-ish design with 1 extra turret. And that's exactly what it is. And being at Tier 7, this is also going to be a pretty tricky ship to balance properly. And the reason why is based off of 3 things. The first of which, of course, is that just like the New Orleans going down to Tier 7, will this thing also have access to radar? Now, I really don't know the answer to that. Again, there's 3 cruisers at Tier 7 for the Americans that do have access to radar, so methinks that the New Orleans might get it. If it does, anyway, then this thing would also get it as well. So that's something very important to note. The second thing is the fact that this ship has the same exact guns that you find on the Cleveland class. And with that being said, it's the rate of fire. And that's the big third part. So the rate of fire on the Cleveland in real life could get to 10 rounds per minute or a 6-second reload. Of course, at Tier 6 right now, it has a 7.5 second reload on its 12 152mm guns. There's absolutely no way that they would allow a 10 rounds per minute rate of fire or even a 7.5 second reload on this USS Helena. 15 of these guns firing HE at point blank range is going to absolutely murder destroyers and will allow for some ridiculous Citadel counts on enemy cruisers that you come across. The Mogami at Tier 8 with 15 155mm guns has a 10 second reload. So with that being the case, I really can't see this thing having a faster rate of fire 1 tier below. It would just absolutely stomp over everything, at least at point-blank range. Now, of course, it doesn't have access to torpedoes. It's probably going to have worse concealment than the Japanese cruisers do. At the end of the day, this is not a Tier 7 Mogami. There is a very big difference between American and Japanese cruiser playstyles, so there's a lot of people out there that are fearing that this thing is just straight-up power creep and that it will, be a Tier 7 Mogami. But again, no torpedoes, and probably worse concealment. One thing to note about this ship is another way that they might be able to reduce its effectiveness is make the turret traverse pretty bad on it. Now, the Cleveland with the stock guns at Tier 6 has a pretty decent turret traverse, but when you do get the upgraded guns, it does slow down pretty considerably. So I think that will be a pretty good way for them to balance the Helena. Another thing to note is that the third turret at the front does face to the rear. So when you're trying to turn your turret, you're only going to be able to shoot 6 guns from the front, whereas the Mogami at Tier 8 is able to use 9 of its guns shooting to the front. So that is something else to take note of. But overall, I think people are overblowing the fact that the Helena will be completely overpowered at Tier 7. Again, if it doesn't get radar, that will be very significant. But there are things that they can do. There are steps that they can take to make this thing fit in at Tier 7 much better. Taking a look now here at the Tier 8 American light cruiser, it is of course the USS Cleveland, and it is finally placed back where it rightfully should be. This ship was built and designed and used in the war in tandem with the Baltimore class heavy cruisers. Of course, the big difference being smaller caliber but more numerous sets of guns. You have 12 152mm guns on this thing, so you do lose some firepower from the USS Helena at Tier 7. However, methinks the Cleveland will finally have the potential to get back to its in real life rate of fire. Currently at Tier 6, it has a 7.5 second reload on the guns. However, in real life, it could get to 10 rounds per minute or a 6 second reload. So we'll see if they decide to do that. And that's something that I honestly could see happening. However, you will have to know that the Edinburgh, the Tier 8 British light cruiser, has a 7.5 second rate of fire on its 152mm guns. And of course, the Cleveland will have access to high explosives. So we'll see if they do decide to give it its very historical rate of fire, or if they just decide to leave it at 7.5 seconds. That will definitely be something to take note of. However, there's a couple other things about the Cleveland. This thing is already known for great AA. It's already known for great maneuverability. It will also have much better concealment because it'll have access to that the Tier 8 concealment equipment slot in the 5th slot, that is. So this thing is going to be really, really good. However, the other big question that must be asked is, will it have access to radar, much like the Baltimore should at Tier 8? That is a question that I don't have the answer to, but we'll see if that's the case. I don't see why it shouldn't have access to radar, but we're going to also have to see how they're going to make a distinct difference between the heavies and the light cruisers. And with that being said, I think there's a consumable that might be used to try to make that delineation a little bit more pronounced. But anyway, the Cleveland at Tier 8, it's exactly where it should be, and this ship will be a fan favorite and also a pretty good one. Here at Tier 9, we have a very paper ship, the USS Seattle. Now, looking on shipscribe.com, it does say that there were 11 plans prepared for studies of light cruisers armed with rapid-firing 6-inch 47 caliber dual-purpose guns, and this work ultimately produced the Worcester class of light cruisers, which comes at Tier 10. So with that being the case, it does mention rapid firing. Now, of course, 6 second reload on the Cleveland at Tier 8, if it has its historical rate of fire, is going to be very, very fast indeed. However, one thing to note, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, with the new Halloween event that came out this year, the Svaztoyar, the Soviet light cruiser based off the Chapayev, which is one of the ships that you can choose, has a consumable that rapidly increases its rate of fire for a set duration of time. So with that being the case, will the light cruisers have access to this consumable to try to make them, unique compared to the American heavy cruisers? And honestly, that is a very good question. They did say, Wargaming that is, use some of these events as a test bed to try out new consumables. And if that is the case, well then one might think that from the Cleveland there on to Tier 10 with the Worcester, we'll have a 6 second reload on its guns and then have the potential to use this consumable to be able to increase its rate of fire to a very large degree. What the increase will be as a percentage, not 100% sure. How long it'll last for, not 100% sure. But that is definitely something that could be the case. So look for the Seattle to have very, very nice rate of fire with the potential for a consumable, something like this. Again, this is just pure speculation on my part, but after going through the forums and going through Reddit and reading some, very intellectually based comments from other guys that are on there and know a lot more about this than I do, that is definitely something that could be in the woodworks. And lastly, here we have the USS Worcester at Tier 10 for the light cruiser line. This thing does look pretty similar to a Des Moines, at least on the front part of the conning tower. However, the ship does have 2 smokestacks instead of the single massive one trunked in the center of the ship. Now, with the Worcester, there are 2 big things. One, of course, is the armament. You get 6 turrets with 2 guns apiece, 3 at the front and 3 at the rear, 152mm guns. These are the very rapid-firing and dual-purpose armaments that you find on a lot of the other American light cruisers. Now, with that being the case, and I'm going to take this information straight from Wikipedia, it did say that, quote, "This design was largely considered a failure, as the main armament of the guns never achieved fire rates of more than 9 to 10 rounds per minute." The 10 rounds per minute, of course, being a 6-second reload, which was lower than the similar design of automatic 8-inch guns on the Newport News. So, with that being the case, the Worcester in real life was pretty much not able to get to the 20 to 25 rounds per minute that the designers ultimately wanted on this ship. So with that being the case, it's either going to have the 6-second reload, which I foresee that happening, and then giving access to the consumable that would increase its rate of fire for a short duration, or maybe they will actually give it what the rate of fire the designers intended to. But with that being the case, then having the consumable that increases the rate of fire of that thing would be absolutely ridiculous and get that reload down to below like 2 seconds or something. And of course, since these aren't British, they have access to high explosives, so the HE spam on this thing would be absolutely ridiculous. Another thing about the Worcester is its AA armament. Of course, the dual-purpose guns, 12 of them, the 6-inch, 24 3-inch or 76mm AA guns, the same ones that you find on the Des Moines, which are absolutely ridiculous in terms of their damage per second. And then, of course, 12 20mm Oerlikon guns as well. So this thing has some sick AA. Ultimately, is going to be just as good, if not better, than the Des Moines in the AA department. And then, of course, we'll probably have access to radar as well. So this thing, I think it could be pretty good. Will this turn into a Minotaur killer with the radar? And it also has really good armor as well. That remains to be seen. But American light cruisers in general actually have really good armor layouts, and they actually have pretty thick belt armor, to be honest with you. So this thing, a lot of people think that it's going to turn into a non-smoke HE spamming version of a Minotaur without torpedoes, of course, so we'll see how that works out. But the Worcester, I think, could be a pretty good Tier 10. Now, there are a lot of people on Reddit that don't think it should be Tier 10 based off of the rate of fire problems that it had in real life. But of course, Wargaming is not afraid to balance it by making the rate of fire better and throwing it at a tier higher or a tier lower, depending on what they do. So with that being the case, the Worcester, I think, will be a nice split away from the Des Moines, which is the Tier 10, of course, and I think will provide the player base with 2 very distinct American cruiser lines to go down based off of their preferred playstyle. Alrighty guys, well there you have it, the American heavy and light cruiser split, the work in progress for it, the announcement, all of this is great news, and I hope you guys found some good information in this. Again, this is pretty opinionated. I was just telling you guys how I think that they could be balanced, how I think that they will perform. However, I do have a few further questions for you guys here right at the end of the video. Please comment in the comment section below what you think, and we can have some nice discourse about it. 1, the Buffalo at Tier 9. That thing has the potential to be an absolute beast. Again, 12 203mm guns and access to torpedoes. Tell me what you guys think about it, and tell me how you think that it could be balanced to make it not overpowered at Tier 9. The second thing, there's a lot of people that are concerned that the American light cruisers will have access to smoke, and this is only based off the assumption because the British light cruisers have access to smoke as well. So what do you guys think about that? I personally don't think that they need smoke, and I think it would be completely unnecessary. American cruisers in general have pretty good armor schemes. They have pretty thick armor belts. I think that you could get away with that. Not having smoke at all and still do fine in these ships. Those 6-inch rapid-firing guns with IFHE, of course, will be very, very powerful. And again, these ships will have access to high explosive shells, unlike the British, so I really don't think that there will be too much trouble. Also, good maneuverability, good concealment. I really don't think adding smoke in with defensive AA and radar would be really bad. You see with the Belfast in-game that combining smoke and radar pretty much leads to an overpowered ship at Tier 7, and I really don't think that that would be a very good thing for them to add here with the American light cruisers And lastly, if you guys have anything on the Dallas and the Seattle, if you can point me in any direction for legitimate plans, please do so. I was just kind of talking out of my ass, to be honest with you, with those ships. Tried looking over those from that website, shipscribe.com, but I just really couldn't find which design it was, to be honest with you. So if you have anything on it, please let me know. And with that being said, this is the Sneaky Snake for Brothers in Arms World of Warships signing off. Please consider giving the video a like, commenting below, of course, as I want you guys to do. I'd really like to hear what your opinion is on this and what you guys think. And if you can back it up with any facts, please do so. So with that being said, I'm signing off. Have a great day.